everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Getting Started with Data Governance, Some Practical Guidance. Let me start by introducing you to today's speakers. We have Top Quadrant's Irene Polikoff, CEO and co-founder, as well as Robert Coyne, Chief Marketing Officer and co-founder. In today's webinar, we will present a couple of brief polls, so thank you in advance for your participation. We will also wrap up with a brief Q&A as time allows. Before we get started, let's review a few logistical items. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along by using your GoToWebinar controls. To post questions, please look on the right-hand side control panel. You should see a drop-down box for questions. If you click on the box, you should be able to post your question at any time during the day's presentation. We will address as many of these as time allows at the conclusion of the webinar. We will also be recording today's webinar, and we'll send a link to that recorded version as well as to the slides. With that, I will hand it over to Robert to get us started. Robert?
Thanks, Christy. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are Top Quadrant, founded in 2001. That was the same year that the vision of the semantic web was born. And ever since then, we've been engaging with this technology to create enterprise applications and to make enterprise information meaningful. The technology was known through the years by various names such as semantic technology, semantic web, linked data, but more recently it's become more widely known and more accessible as knowledge graph technology. And since 2015 or so, our entire focus has been on to provide comprehensive data governance solutions based on knowledge graphs. So today's program, I'm going to make a few quick observations about data governance and then turn it over to Irene. And she's going to start with some common data challenges that could guide you to pick an area of focus, and then you can align solution capabilities for data management and governance to that focus area. And that gives you a sort of iterative and incremental approach to starting with data governance. And then we'll try to save some time at the end, as Christy said, for Q&A. The perception of the importance and value of data governance has really grown strongly and rapidly in the last few years. But what is data governance really, and how does it deliver value? There are numerous definitions offered, along with some quite elaborate methodologies and conceptual frameworks from many sources, standards bodies and professional organizations, gurus who write books and conduct tutorials at conferences, and vendors, of course. They can provide guidance, but it can all seem pretty complex and overwhelming, especially when you're getting started. Meanwhile, there is no single agreed definition of data governance. The practices of data governance are still evolving and encompass a broad and comprehensive footprint in most organizations and enterprises. People in the last year or two, people have recognized that effective data governance must connect some types of top-down planning and activities such as establishing roles, processes, and policies with more traditional bottom-up types of actions such as data cataloging and metadata management. Some people call this data governance 2.0. We like this definition from Wikipedia. It emphasizes that what's important is that any comprehensive solution must account for and include people, processes, and technology. In today's program, Irene will show you how you can get started in a very concrete way, guided by common data challenges and business drivers. Later, she'll come back to a simple framework that we use that provides a useful, practical view of various aspects of data governance that need to be integrated and connected. And with that, I'll turn it over to Irene.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, as Robert was saying, with the growing interest in data governance and some lack of well-established definitions, well-established best practices, it's no surprise that when we talk to people, to customers, to prospects, we often hear, well, we're just starting and we're not sure how to get started. And it causes many people understandable stress. And while this is understandable, we think that it's important to take a look at it from the perspective of, well, you actually most likely have already started. And I am saying that because you're managing your data today. You have been managing it for many years. And that's what data governance is. It's about processes associated with taking care and using your data. So there are some already established processes, best practices, roles, and stakeholders in your organization. Maybe they're not as explicit as you would want them to be going forward, but they do exist. So as you get started, a very important question to ask is, can you do it better? Of course, this is why you thinking about the data governance initiative, because you believe that although you are managing your data today, there's ways to improve it. And closely connected question to this is, all right, and what actually causes you to ask this question? Because it is important to focus, and I will stress it multiple times throughout today's webinar. And in all cases, we came across this desire to do it better is typically powered by some very concrete challenges and issues that you are typically experiencing, that you're hearing from data stakeholders that kind of tell you what they'd like to be better and what does it mean to be better. So we assembled some sample list of common issues or challenges that we hear from people that often come in forefront as they start their data governance initiatives. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a list that we hear again and again. And we'd like to hear from you which ones of those issues are important to you and to your data stakeholders. Christy, could you, yeah.
Okay, so if everyone will just take a second to answer the question and select all of the challenges that do apply to your organization. And if there happens to be a challenge that's not listed, please feel free to let us know what your specific data challenge is by submitting a different response through your question box.
And we'll talk about that, each of them in a moment in more detail, talking about what actually drives each of them, and then connect to the kind of solution capabilities that you could put in place in order to address them.
I think we're still voting. We're going to give it a couple more seconds and then I'll close the poll. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close and then we'll share the results.
Okay, well, that's not surprising. It's pretty much an issues across, but I see that lots of people are focusing on data quality. Okay. And also availability of the data. So let's take a look at each of those challenges and dive a little bit deeper. We often hear that people don't know where data resides and how it's being used, and associated with it are concerns that, maybe we're duplicating the data, or maybe there is some critical data, but the stakeholders don't really know about it, and therefore they can't take advantage of it. So duplication is actually also connected to quality, because if your data is duplicated, then it's easy for it to get out of sync, and that will impact the quality, that will impact the decision making. So there is some interconnection between those challenges, of course. Takes too long to get data when we need it. Well, in today's world, the assumptions about what can be available and how quickly that can be available are changing rapidly. And the range of stakeholders that want to be able to access data and want to be able to get hold of data is increasing consistently. And the systems that in many organizations are in place are really have not been designed to address this challenge. And that's why many people look to data governance to help that with that. Data quality. So many of you have picked the data quality problem, and there are different aspects to it. So you may know about some specific problems with data quality, and if you do, then you know exactly where you could focus and what you need to improve. But there could be also a situation where it is a little bit less clear. You know, we don't know what we don't know. We suspect that we have some issues with data quality, and we are concerned that we can't really trust our data, but we are not quite sure exactly where those problems are prevalent. So there you need to do a bit more analysis to figure out your best path in addressing data quality. Another issue that we often hear about is this low data competency. As I mentioned, as more stakeholders work directly with data, and everyone today is, or most everyone's job today is somehow connected to data, and users are becoming more and more comfortable with it. There's increasing need for all the stakeholders to have a common language and have a common understanding of the terms, of the meaning of the data, etc. So that challenge comes to light as a result of it. And then again, availability of the data. And you may know where data is, you may know that it exists, but you know, actually using it presents a challenge. It could be because the access is blocked, and today there's many regulations and there's very well-founded concerns about the regulations. So it's always a balance. How do you balance complying with those regulations yet providing timely access when it's needed? There's also a challenge that's associated with a growing number of different formats and what formats users can actually use. And they often want the data, in order to be useful, they want it to be available in a specific way that may not align well with, you know, how it is available in existing systems. So those are all sorts of problems that you hear about from your stakeholders as you start your data governance initiative. But these problems in some ways are, you know, kind of tactical and very important issues. The other way to look at this and focus yourself from perspective of getting started is why these problems are becoming important to you. So that's an important tool for deciding on which problems to actually focus on first. So in addition to these very concrete problems, you also have business drivers that are making them acute, requiring you to solve those problems. And there is quite a number of business drivers. This is not an exhaustive. It's not an exhaustive list, but these are very common business drivers that we hear about. And again, we'd like to get your view on what are the important business drivers for you, what is causing your organization to start the data governance initiative.
And again, if your business driver is not listed, please feel free to let us know what your business driver is through the question box on the right-hand side control panel. We'll just give a couple more seconds. People are still voting and we'll share results. Almost there. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Share those results.
Interesting. It's interesting that mergers and acquisition has not been selected that much, but lots of feedback on the growing complexity of data ecosystem. Yes, we hear that a lot, and that's definitely what's happening for enterprises today as they're incorporating more and more data sources, and that's certainly driving all sorts of complexity, increasing number of applications that deal with data, increasing number of formats, and so on. So why have we focused in this presentation so far on the issues and on the business drivers? Because as you get started, it's very important to pick the right focus area. In reality, you will not be able to address all problems at once. Now, the problems, as we've talked about, are interconnected, and even the business drivers could be interconnected to some extent. And as you work on one of the challenges and respond to one of the business drivers, you're likely to make other challenges less acute, but still, focusing and saying, this is my target, this is my goal, is very important, because it gives you a roadmap of where to go. It gives you very concrete focus, and it also puts some goals in front of you that are more concrete and more attainable. Now, it doesn't mean you don't want to dilute your efforts from the beginning. This doesn't mean that you're not going to incrementally address those later on, but it is important to set yourself a very focused goal, and that is also concrete, and where you could deliver results and show benefits. So the other part of focusing is also who you're going to work with. Many of our customers and people we interact with in general come from quite large organizations, and the problems exist across the entire organization. Again, it's harder to solve it for everyone, and collaboration with your business is very important. So along with picking the challenges that you're going to address, understanding what business drivers you're going to focus on, it's also quite important to pick a business or organization area that you will work with. And you'll want to pick one where the need is strong. There is a pull. You don't have to push these changes, because there will be some changes on them, and they will be your partners. And then when you achieve your first success, you could expand. It's much easier to expand when you have some quick wins, where you have some success, and it's easier to get started that way and starburst from there than trying to from the beginning encompass everything possible. And maybe what I'm saying is, maybe it's most likely what I'm saying are kind of very simple and obvious points, yet we see these issues about boiling the ocean, trying to go too broad from the beginning. We see them quite often, and this is where people get stuck. because if you're trying to do too much, then getting started becomes increasingly logarithmically more and more difficult, and making progress also becomes more and more difficult. So let's say you've picked your areas of focus and you've figured all of this out. The next step is what to do actually, and this would brings us to this slide talking about different capabilities that and solution areas that will be part of your data governance initiative. So very broadly speaking, the way we perceive the space based on many conversations with people is they're kind of a distinct area of reference data management. And this is quite important if your problem area is data quality. Because the reason I'm saying this is because reference data represents often more than half of all the data, and it categorizes the data, and when there is no effective reference data management and data comes together and used in the reports, used in the exchanges between systems, this is where data quality problems happen, because you're now aggregating information, apples and oranges, or you moving data around and you're not actually moving it correctly or interpreting it correctly. So reference data management is quite important for data quality type of focus. Metadata management, as you could see, has a very broad range of capabilities, and we'll talk about some of them in more detail in this webinar. So there's different aspects of metadata management. Of course, there are things like data dictionaries and data catalogs, where you catalog all your data sources. This typically, to be effective and deliver value, need to be connected to business glossaries. So that's another set of capabilities that you may look at as you get started. But on the other hand, also all the business metadata is quite important. And by business metadata, I don't mean a business glossary, but I actually mean what activities data is supporting, where it's being used, what high-level information objects are being exchanged, what systems and applications you have in place. So that's pretty high level and kind of high level metadata management, and what information objects those systems are exchanging, producing, what are they being used for activities in your organization. That's where I'm talking about data system inventory. You also see data quality here, because as you start cataloging your data, the data quality could get improved as part of it, especially if you start capturing results of your data quality runs, and that will give you a view into your data quality if you're not quite sure what is reliable and what's not reliable, where problems exist, what kind of problems exist across your data sources. So your data governance solution can serve as a unified place to capture that type of information. Some of our customers are also looking to incorporate unstructured data documents into this management, into this overall governance framework. And this is where we hear vocabulary management to be used, the content corpuses, documents, taxonomies, extracting structured information out of unstructured data, so it could be classified correctly for various purposes. Integrating it with unstructured data, how can that be done? Because that gives you a holistic view of the information. Records management becomes very important, and those records are often documents that need to be tagged appropriately to ensure their management. And finally, when we look below, we see supportive capabilities. So you do, of course, since you're doing governance, you need to have policies in place. You probably need to have some workflows in place. Your roles with respect to data, your data governance roles become important. You may want to capture some metrics so you show your progress. Hopefully, you'll focus in the right way so the progress will be obvious, because users, your stakeholders, will start to see their pain points being addressed. But having some governance metrics can also be important. Where we see too much of the focus on the workflows and too much of the focus on metrics, that typically indicates that some other value is not obvious to the business, and now your data governance organization have to prove that they're delivering something. And then they start to go into, okay, let's take a look at all of our governance metrics. As I said, this is important, but the value has to be self-evident, and therefore you need to have the right focus. And then speaking about automation, as you move forward, automation will become increasingly important. Maybe not so much in the beginning, but as you expand your scope and incorporate more and more, this is a big job. So having technology help you with, let's say, mapping your technical, your data elements to business terms, etc., and doing other things for you will increasingly become important and should be part of the solution. So let's kind of take a look at the problem-solution pairing. So if you pick a certain area of focus, what solution blocks should you want to put in place as you're getting started? So if you don't know where data resides, data system inventory can help you, and also that will drive your data lineage. If it takes you too long to get the data when you need it, again, data system inventory will help you, also having some kind of a data request workflow. Quality, I've mentioned that reference data management is very important here, and then further capturing, just starting to capture your data quality so you understand where it exists and where it stands. That's another solution block that you want to have in place. Low data competency, you could see that this is where you start, business glossaries start to become important. Also, in generally, data cataloging, and again, data system inventory. And then availability of the data, you'll see the blocks here. So the new one here has to do with your security and privacy policies. So when you look at this mapping, you realize that actually it is possible to put in place some capabilities that will address, as you're getting started, multiple problems, because there is some overlap. Nevertheless, focus is important because it will totally drive your decision making. So let's take a look at the example. And since the data system inventory is figuring out in a number of this problem and challenges statements, we've decided to start by taking a deeper look into it. We also believe that it offers a very good kind of a balance of value versus effort, because it's fairly simple to inventory your systems, yet it will provide you with a lot of interesting capabilities. And when I say fairly simple, I mean that yeah, of course, organizations have hundreds and thousands of applications, but that is much smaller number when you compare to, let's say, data elements. So how your data system inventory may look like? Well, it basically a list of your systems with some information about them, and you could see here some example of the type of the information that you can be capturing about this particular system. And our example is focused on the medical domain, so we're talking about patient discharge module. So you see on the right, its description. You see where it's being used. You see what high-level information assets it produces and requires. And when we talk about information assets, we are not talking about technical data elements, but rather we are talking about the objects that business will understand. Here are the things that your business stakeholders talk about. They don't talk about particular tables or fields in a database. They typically will talk about something like a patient discharge form or some kind of a report or a care plan, etc. So there's not that much information here, and you could potentially capture a lot more. So what kind of information can you capture? You know, obviously there are names, there are acronyms, there are various descriptions, purposes, references to additional documentation. So all this pretty generic kind of metadata. Then there is things that are a bit more specific, and they have to do with location, maybe with access control, maybe with policies that the system has to comply with, and what is the status of that compliance. You could also go into its software properties, such as what type of technology is being used, what type of database information is stored, whether it's available as a server, you know, where that access point is, and so on. And you could also look at the enterprise role. And when you were looking at that system, this is where some of our metadata is, the majority of the metadata actually, what information assets are getting exchanged. You don't have to capture all this information. And there's actually more than that. Tablet Edge comes pre-built with the metadata models that you could use for each different asset type. So an asset type of a business application, let's say. There's a lot of predefined fields that you could potentially populate, but you don't have to do everything ever, and certainly you don't have to do everything from the start. You know, you saw that that I had actually not that much information captured, and that's already can be quite useful because it could help you answer some questions. You could incrementally add more fields. So the kind of questions that you may be asking is, all right, I have a patient discharge form. How is it being produced? What systems are interacting to produce this information? Again, at the very high level, we have a number of systems here. We also see some stakeholders and roles that get involved in it. And you could interact with this type of view, and it already delivers some very useful answers. The arrows that you see between these different systems, actually you could drill down more into them because the information can be captured at a pretty high level, as we see here, just the logical level of the information exchange at the information object level, level, Or as you proceed with your data governance initiatives in the future, you could go deeper and actually incorporate your data cataloging and your data sources to support your more of your data stakeholders. So at the moment, we primarily have this type of a logical information level, which is easier to attain as you get started. So something like this at the high level, you could actually put together in a matter of months or two, and it's already has value, and you're engaging with your business stakeholders, and you're helping them answer questions that they're interested in, and you're helping facilitate other more detailed conversation about more detailed data exchanges that your technical people need to have with business people. And then as you move forward, you could connect data cataloging to that. And then you could start seeing more details at the level of, database view and data elements, database columns, etc. So take into account physical flow and how it relates to your logical data flows. Once you start talking about physical lineage, we are moving into the space of data cataloging, and that can have a very detailed information at the level of individual columns, some type of data profiling that comes into place, like a number of records, or min max values when you drill into a specific on a specific data element. You could also have some data samples that help users understand your data. We talked about data quality. You could capture results of your data quality runs, etc. So all of this is possible and important going forward. If you decide actually to make data cataloging as your starting point, you need to be very careful, because it's very easy for this to become just a technical initiative. So what you'll be doing is focusing on the data sources and getting the technical metadata from the data sources itself. And it's a challenging and interesting initiative for technical people. And technology folks often assume that they know what the business side needs, but the requirements of business are rarely obvious. So if your starting point is a data catalog, building a fully integrated metadata-driven environment that will connect the business concept and the physical data stores is challenging. So that's difficult to do it as a first step. But this is where success will come from. It's from the business actually using these resources. If you just have a technical resource that focuses only on the technical data and metadata available in your data sources, that's probably not going to be that interesting for your business people, and that will make it harder for you to prove value of your initiative as you're getting started. So very important, moving forward, have to plan it carefully so you have enough of the critical mass, enough of the business focus. Which brings me to another topic. So we find this framework quite useful, calling it a data governance triangle. As you execute your data governance initiative, there are different aspects of it. Obviously, cataloging and capturing information, that's what we call representative governance, where you bring information in and store it in one place so it's accessible. The reason you're doing it is to serve some purpose. And that's what we're calling applied governance. And it's very important to know what purpose, what use case you are serving? Is it about impact analysis? Is it about data quality, compliance, lineage, and so on? And at the same time, as you do all of this, you also need to think about management of governance itself. So we're calling it here executive governance. And this is where your policies come in, your frameworks, methodologies, workflows, metrics, etc. So in reality, you're going to be doing a little bit of everything incrementally as you move forward and doing some work in each of these areas. So we looked already at capturing information. We looked at the application of it from the perspective of lineage. Let's take a look a bit at this executive governance side. So workflows is what we often hear people talk about when governance initiatives start. And it's very easy, again, to start overly focusing on workflows. Our product, Upgrade Edge, comes with some pre-built workflow templates. And you could create your custom templates to support your processes. So what we typically advise our customers, and that comes from experience, is get started with some default pre-built workflows, maybe some very simple approval flow that is generic. As you move forward and you learn more, you could incrementally add workflows, but you should not get overly focused on workflows and create hundreds and hundreds of them and put a lot of bandage in a sense, or constrained a lot of how your stakeholders work with data. It has to be the right amount, because this is not necessarily a due process like approval your travel expenses. There is a lot of collaboration and interaction between stakeholders, and we focus in the product of providing means of that collaboration and not just workflows. But as you put in place workflows, the subject of roles becomes important, and there is a number of useful pre-built roles that you could capture at the level of individual assets. This is just a starting point. In reality, in the organization, you will want to customize it to the type of roles that you will want to have in your organization. And you may want to assign them at the individual user level, or you may also want to assign them to organization, a department, a working group, etc. Both of those are, valid and useful things to do. So some roles can be at this level of the individual assets, but as you assemble more and more information, things like your reference data sets, your taxonomies, your business glossaries, various catalogs, you also need a higher level organization and roles associated with this higher level. So here you see organizing those collections of assets by different business or data subject area, and ability to assign roles at any level in that hierarchy. So you could have roles for the entire business area. You could have a role for a specific, let's say, reference data set, a business glossary, or data catalog, or you could have a role, as I just showed before, for a specific asset. So all of this becomes important. And of course, you've done this type of work. You want to reflect it and manage and track it yourself, and also make it available to the rest of the organization. And that's where some metrics come into play. And it's good if they're just generated as a byproduct of your activities. Like here we see, for example, metrics on governance role assignments for different business areas. You could have some metrics on running workflows and so on. Another important thing as you progress with your data governance initiative is to make sure that whatever you capture is easily accessible to everyone. And that means search access to all your assets that is presented in an easy to interact with way. So free form text, here you see some faceting, and many of your stakeholders will just use that as a main view of interacting with the data governance environment, because actually they want to look for things, maybe they want to explore them in this lineage type of diagram or some other visualizations that I showed. And it's also important to, and that's one of the examples of collaborative capabilities, it's also important to give them a chance to provide feedback, to interact, maybe have some discussions and comments. So this becomes more than just a search view, but actually a collaboration view where they could get more information, get more details, but also provide their input and maybe start some workflows if you have those in place. So I want to conclude before we move to questions with saying something about TabRate Edge. It's a highly flexible environment that is based on the standards that lets you capture all sorts of information. So you saw me showing different aspects of information about business applications or data assets that could be captured. Similarly, it could support capturing your reference data, support capturing your business glossaries, and your documents and unstructured information, and importantly, connecting all of this, making it possible for both people and software to interact with this information, and to add some automation to your data governance with various reasoning and machine learning algorithms, because it is, as you move forward, it will incorporate a lot of data sources and increasingly become difficult to do just manually. In the beginning, that you could start small and grow, and we believe that this platform actually provides an excellent environment for this kind of growth and establishes you as a knowledge-driven enterprise. So with that, let me see what questions we have. I'll pass it over to Christy.
Thanks, Irene. And if you haven't already submitted a question, please do so by submitting any question or any discussion point in the question box located on the right-hand side control panel. We do have a couple of questions, so we'll go ahead and get started there. Okay, here's the first question, Irene. At what point after you start with data governance is it important to have a data governance tool?
Okay, well, we are a vendor of data governance tools, so it's probably not going to surprise you if I'm going to say, well, pretty early on, but in earnest, I really do think it's the right answer. And the reason I think it's the right answer is because, yes, you could start some of your cataloging with, let's say, in a low-tech type of environment. You could create spreadsheets, etc. And you probably have those kind of artifacts already, because you've been doing some management of data, and many people pull together all sorts of spreadsheets because they get questions and they need to have them answered. So you probably have that information in various places. but it's quite important to have a proper data governance solution, even early on as you're getting started, because it will help you get organized. It's kind of embed some of the best practices. Being web-based, it will make access and collaboration easy for a number of stakeholders. So it's a good place to start. One of the things, one of the questions and issues that we hear from customers is, okay, if we focus on something, but then we have to incrementally build out, how do we make sure that we don't necessarily have to put in place this big bang environment that may or may not serve our needs going forward. And also, as we get started, maybe we don't have a huge budget, etc. And for that reason, the way we have Tabulative Edge available is through packages. So let's say if you want to just do business glossaries, just get that. And the cost is quite low, but with that comes all this executive governance side. So you could already define your roles, you could do your metrics, you could put in place some workflows. So no matter what package you take, that's all is in place, and you're starting to build out your knowledge graph of governance information. Or if you want to focus on reference data, just get that package and capture your reference data sets and work on that side of your data governance and quality issues. And again, you have access to roles and so on. And when you're ready to move forward, you could add another capability, another package. You don't have to reinstall anything. It's all in the same environment. You just get updated license key and it gets turned on. And that's another part of this incremental and grow with success type of approach.
Thank you, Irene. Let's go to another question. To what extent is automation possible for data governance? Could you give a couple of examples where it is being applied?
Yeah, sure. Also, quite a good question. I mentioned automation in passing, and let me focus a little bit more on that. Obviously, as you start doing data cataloging, that's immediately an automation aspect to this, because you want to be able to just point to a data source and get all the information about the data source automatically into your system. And Tabulative Edge comes with this type of connectors that will bring your metadata about your databases and your data sets and so on. After you have done that, you'll want to enrich it with business metadata in order for it to be valuable for your business stakeholders. And so the first automation that I talked about is quite straightforward. So pointing on the data source, getting your data elements in, doing some profiling, doing some sampling and so on. The next one becomes a bit more challenging, because now you want to connect this technical metadata, use it somehow to connect to the business context. And you'll have to have people looking at it in order to establish those connections reliably. But still, you could have some assistance from the data governance solution as part of this automation, and Tabulative Edge does that. It could suggest the business terms that your data elements should be mapped to, based on the information available about business terms, based on the information available about your data elements, as a result of sampling, profiling, etc. So that is possible, but that part is definitely human in the loop, where you want to look at those suggestions, accept, reject them, etc. I also mentioned integrating into it unstructured data, and this is where some automation and assistance with reasoning, machine learning, etc. also come into place, because you want to be able to extract and tag your documents with information, so that with your taxonomy terms or your glossary terms, etc. So it becomes integrated with your structured information, etc. All sorts of rules and transformation can be ran, and so for this tagging and auto-classifying, we have a module that assists with that, and that's based on training it on some corpus of data, and then it does fairly good job. So you could, after it's trained, you could just let it run. The workflow aspect of it is also part of the automation, because workflows facilitate processes, and they move tasks from one role to another, and you could execute those other automation activities as part of the workflow as well. So yeah, incrementally you could bring in more and more automation. It's always going to be a combination of manual effort and some machine assisted intelligence, but they could work together and complement each other.
Thank you, Irene. I think we're getting close to the hour, so we will go ahead and wrap up today's presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we will be providing a link to the recorded presentation as well as to the slide deck in an email that will be sent to each of you in a couple of days. We hope you found today's information valuable, and thank you for your attention and your interest in the webinar. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye.